My husband told me he was done with our marriage and was going back to his African woman. He even thanked me for the house I bought in his name. I didn't cry, just nodded. But he didn't know I had already changed everything about that house. They say betrayal never comes from strangers. It comes from the people you trust with your heart, your home, and your future. I learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Before I dive into the heart of this story, let me pause for just a moment and say this. I want to know where you are watching my revenge story from. Let me know how far it has traveled. I've seen women from New York, men from California, and even viewers overseas in Europe and Africa reach out. So tell me, where are you right now listening to my story of love, betrayal, and sweet revenge? Now, my name is Linda and I am 55 years old. I live in Florida, in a small but beautiful town not too far from the Gulf Coast. I worked as a registered nurse for more than 30 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I spent countless nights on double shifts, holding the hands of strangers in pain, comforting families who had lost loved ones, and giving all the energy I had to a job that never really gave back what I poured into it. I raised 2 children on my own after a bitter divorce in my 30s. Both of them are grown now. My daughter lives in Texas with her husband and kids, and my son is in the military, deployed overseas most of the time. For years, my life revolved around work, bills, and the lonely silence of my house after long shifts. I didn't think love was still in the cards for me, but life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. I met Patrick at a community cultural event here in Florida. He was younger than me, 42 at the time, tall, dark, and handsome in a way that turned heads when he walked into a room. He carried himself with charm and confidence, and when he spoke, there was a deep accent in his voice that made every word sound like poetry. Patrick was from Africa, and he told me stories of his village, his traditions, his dreams of building a life in America. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Patrick gave me attention, affection, and what felt like genuine love. He'd cook me dishes from his culture, laugh at my old nurse jokes, and sit up with me when I came home late and tired from work. He called me his queen, his blessing, his miracle. I didn't realize then that every sweet word from his lips was a brick in the trap he was building for me. Within 2 years, we were married. My friends warned me about the age difference and the cultural differences, but I silenced them. I believed love conquered all. I believed Patrick loved me the way I loved him. We lived modestly at first. I had my little house from before, and Patrick worked odd jobs while studying for his certification in healthcare. He told me over and over how much he admired my dedication and sacrifice, how much he wanted to be like me one day. He told me we should dream bigger, plan for retirement, invest in property. And I listened. Because of all those years of nursing and saving, I had a good sum tucked away. Enough to finally buy myself a dream home. The kind of place I had fantasized about while working endless night shifts. A beach house in Florida. I wanted something by the water, peaceful, where I could grow old and enjoy the fruits of my labor. When I told Patrick, he was overjoyed, or at least he acted like he was. But then he suggested something that at first made me uneasy. He said, "Linda, put the house in my name. You've worked so hard. You've carried everything for so long. Let me carry this for us. Let me be the man." I hesitated. Deep down, my instincts screamed no. But I silenced that voice. I wanted to believe in my husband. I wanted to trust him completely. So against my better judgment, I signed the papers and had the property listed under Patrick's name. But what Patrick didn't know was this. I wasn't a naive woman anymore. Life had taught me lessons. I had been burned before, and while I wanted to trust him, I also wanted to protect myself. So quietly, with the help of a close friend who worked in real estate law, I made sure the documents carried an expiration clause. After a set period, the ownership would revert back to me unless renewed with my approval. Patrick had no idea. And that decision, the one I almost second-guessed, would one day save me. At first, everything seemed perfect. We moved into that beautiful beach house, and for a while I felt like I was living in a dream. I'd sip coffee on the porch in the mornings, watching the sun rise over the ocean, while Patrick sat beside me holding my hand. I thought this was it, the reward for years of struggle, heartbreak, and loneliness. But slowly little cracks began to show. Patrick started spending more time on his phone, speaking in hushed tones late at night. He'd take trips alone, saying he was visiting friends or handling business. I caught him chatting online with women from his home country. When I confronted him, he laughed it off. Linda, you're imagining things. You're overthinking. One evening as I was preparing dinner, Patrick dropped a bombshell that shook my world. He looked me in the eye and said, Linda, I love you, but I can't deny my roots. There's a woman back home in my village. She understands me in ways you never will. I'm leaving to be with her. I nearly dropped the pan I was holding. My heart slammed against my chest. You're leaving me? After everything? After I trusted you? After I bought this house for us? Patrick's face was stone cold. He wasn't the loving husband I had fallen for. He was someone else entirely. The house is in my name, he said flatly. You'll be fine, Linda. You're strong. But I can't stay. My people, my culture, my woman, they call me back. Tears blurred my vision, but anger was already burning in my chest. I said nothing. Not then. Because while Patrick thought he was walking away with everything, he didn't know he was leaving behind the seeds of his own downfall. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the house I had built with my blood and sweat. My mind replayed every sacrifice I had made, every hour I had worked, every penny I had saved, just to be tossed aside for a fantasy in some far-off village. But deep inside a voice whispered, wait, watch, revenge will come. And oh, it did. Because what Patrick didn't know, what he never suspected, was that the very house he thought he owned would become the weapon of his undoing. When Patrick walked out that evening, suitcase in hand, I stood by the window and watched him drive away. His taillights faded into the Florida night, and I stood in silence, not crying, not screaming, just breathing slowly, letting the reality sink in. My husband, the man I had sacrificed for, chosen against the advice of my friends, trusted against my instincts, had left me for a woman in his African village. For the first time in years, I felt completely hollow. I spent the next few days moving through the house like a ghost. Every corner carried his presence, the cologne in the bathroom, the shoes by the door, the half-empty bottle of his favorite whiskey on the counter. I couldn't bring myself to touch anything. It was as if touching it would make the betrayal more real. But the silence gave me time to think. And thinking led to planning. You see, I wasn't a young woman anymore. At 55, I'd seen too much, lived through too much to collapse under heartbreak. My first marriage had taught me pain. Nursing had taught me resilience. Raising kids on my own had taught me survival. So when Patrick thought he had destroyed me, what he really did was awaken a part of me I had buried. A calculating, strategic side that didn't cry for long but instead sharpened its claws. Days turned into weeks, and from what I gathered, Patrick had flown back to Africa. He didn't call, didn't check in, didn't care. Fine. Let him run to his so-called village woman. I went back to work, back to my routines, but always with one eye on the future. Then one morning my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. Linda, the voice said after I answered. It was Patrick. He sounded tired, almost frustrated. How are you? I laughed bitterly. How am I? You left me, Patrick. Remember? To go be with your village woman. You don't get to ask me how I am. He sighed. Linda, please. I didn't call to fight. I wanted to let you know I'm coming back soon. Things didn't go exactly as I planned here. Oh, I said, leaning back in my chair. What went wrong? Did your village woman not roll out the red carpet for you? He was silent for a long moment. Linda, don't be cruel. Cruel. I snapped. Patrick, you abandoned me. You threw away our marriage for some fantasy back home. And now you call me because things didn't work out? You don't get sympathy from me. The call ended shortly after, but it was just the beginning. Within days, I got another call. This time from a real estate agent. Patrick had tried to sell the Florida beach house. Imagine his face when he discovered he couldn't. Because of that little clause I had slipped into the paperwork, the property had reverted to me. Legally, completely, irrevocably. Patrick's name was worthless on those documents now. The agent explained that Patrick had stormed into their office, demanding to put the house on the market, only to be told he had no authority over the property anymore. He had argued, shouted, even threatened legal action. But the law was on my side. The papers were airtight. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the porch of my beach house, and listened to the waves crash against the shore. For the first time since Patrick left, I smiled. The house was mine. My sacrifice, my money, my years of work, it was all safe. Patrick had left me thinking he'd won. But in reality, he had walked straight into his own downfall. But things didn't end there. A week later, Patrick showed up at my door. He looked nothing like the confident, charming man I had married. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes hollow, his posture slumped. He carried one small duffel bag, and I realized with a jolt that this was all he had left. "Linda," he said softly, almost pleading. "Please, can we talk?" I folded my arms across my chest. "Talk? You made your choice, Patrick. You walked out. What could we possibly have to talk about?" "I was wrong," he whispered. I thought going back would give me peace. But she doesn't love me, Linda. She only wanted what little money I had. When I told her I couldn't give her the house, she left me. She laughed in my face. I came back with nothing. I don't even have money for a flight back if I wanted to leave again." His voice cracked, and for a moment I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the night he told me he was leaving, the coldness in his eyes, the way he dismissed me like I was disposable. And the pity burned away. "You thought you could have it all, Patrick," I said firmly. "Me, the house, and your village woman. But life doesn't work that way. You don't get to spit on the people who love you, and then come crawling back when your plans collapse." Tears filled his eyes. "Linda, please. Just let me stay in the house. Just until I get back on my feet." I shook my head slowly. "This house is mine. You never owned it, not really. You never paid for it, never sacrificed for it. You wanted the title without the work, but I was always the one holding everything together. And now, Patrick, you can't stay here. Not anymore." He dropped to his knees on the porch, begging, "Please, Linda. Don't do this to me." I stared down at him, my heart hard as stone. "You did this to yourself." And with that, I closed the door in his face. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. A man like Patrick, desperate and prideful, wouldn't disappear quietly. He would try again, try something, anything, to claw his way back into the life he had thrown away. And I was ready, because this time I wasn't just a loving wife. I was a woman who had been betrayed, humiliated, and underestimated. And that woman was about to show Patrick just how costly his betrayal would become. When I closed the door on Patrick that night, I leaned against it and took a long, shaky breath. For years I had been the woman who gave and gave, my time, my money, my heart. But in that moment I realized the power of finally saying no. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. A man like Patrick didn't just vanish. Desperation makes people dangerous, and I knew he would be back. The following week, I returned to work at the hospital. It was almost comforting, slipping into the routine of patient charts, for drips, and the quiet hum of medical machines. But when I drove home each evening, I half expected to see Patrick waiting on the porch. And sure enough, one evening there he was. He was sitting on the front steps, shoulders slumped, a cardboard suitcase by his side. His once perfect hair was unkempt, his shirt wrinkled, his shoes scuffed. He looked more like a lost boy than the man who had once strutted around declaring he owned everything. When I stepped out of my car, his eyes lit up with a desperate hope. "Linda," he said, standing quickly, "please hear me out." I sighed. "Patrick, what do you want from me? I've given you everything already, years of my life, my trust, my money, this house. And you threw it all away." "I made a mistake," he said, his voice trembling. "I thought she loved me. I thought going back would give me what I was missing. But I was wrong. She used me. She laughed at me when she found out the house wasn't mine. She told everyone in the village I was a fool. I came back here with nothing. You're the only one I have left." I crossed my arms. "So now you come crawling back after spitting in my face? After breaking my heart? After trying to sell the house I worked for, thinking you'd walk away rich?" Tears welled in his eyes. "Please, Linda. Just let me stay. Just until I get back on my feet." I looked at him for a long moment. The old Linda, the nurse, the caretaker, the mother who always forgave, wanted to open the door and let him in. But the woman who had been betrayed, humiliated, and discarded, she knew better. "Patrick," I said coldly, "you made your bed. Now lie in it." I walked past him and into the house, locking the door behind me. He stayed outside for hours, knocking, begging, pleading. Eventually, I peeked out the window and saw him curled up on the porch, asleep like a stray dog. And that's when the idea hit me. If Patrick wanted to taste humility, I would serve it to him on a silver platter. The next morning, I called my lawyer friend, the same one who had helped me with the clause in the house papers. I explained the situation and she chuckled softly. "Linda, you've got him exactly where you want him," she said. "He's powerless. Legally, financially, emotionally. You could kick him to the curb right now and he couldn't do a thing." "I know," I replied, "but I want him to feel what I felt. I want him to live the pain of being discarded, the way he discarded me." So I let Patrick linger. I didn't let him in the house, but I didn't call the police either. For days, he camped on the porch, surviving on scraps from neighbors, looking more pitiful by the hour. People in the neighborhood began whispering. Some asked me who he was. And when I told them, "That's my husband, the man who left me for another woman and then tried to steal my house," their eyes widened with shock. The gossip spread quickly. Soon, Patrick couldn't walk to the corner store without hearing the whispers. He had come back expecting me to fold, to welcome him with open arms. Instead, he was a broken man, humiliated in front of strangers. But my revenge wasn't complete yet. One evening, after another day of him begging, I opened the door just a crack. He looked up, eyes hollow. "Linda," he whispered, "I'll do anything. Please, just let me in." "Anything?" I asked. "Yes, anything." "Fine," I said, my voice sharp as glass. "Tomorrow morning you're going to come with me. You're going to sit beside me in church. And when people ask who you are, you're going to tell them the truth. Every word. How you betrayed me. How you left me for another woman. How you thought you owned my house. You're going to confess it publicly." His face went pale. "Linda, please. Don't make me do that. It's humiliating." I leaned closer. "You humiliated me when you left. You humiliated me when you tried to steal what I worked for. Now it's your turn." The next morning, dressed in the same wrinkled shirt and worn-out shoes, Patrick followed me into church. I sat in the front pew, head held high while he squirmed beside me. When the pastor opened the floor for testimonies, I nudged Patrick. "Now," I whispered. Shaking, he stood up and walked to the front. His voice cracked as he spoke. "My name is Patrick," he said. "And I wronged my wife. I betrayed her. I left her for another woman, thinking I could have a better life. I thought I owned the house she bought. I was wrong. Now I have nothing. And she has everything." The church fell silent. All eyes were on him. Some people gasped, others whispered. I sat back, my heart pounding with satisfaction. When he returned to the pew, his face burned with shame. For the first time, Patrick knew what it felt like to be exposed, stripped of pride, reduced to nothing. And I wasn't done yet. Later that week, I filed for divorce. When the papers were served to Patrick, his shoulders slumped even further. He tried to argue, tried to beg, but he had no leverage left. No house, no money, no dignity. I stood firm. "Patrick, you thought you could take everything from me. But in the end, you've lost everything instead. And I've gained my freedom." By the time the divorce went through, Patrick was living out of a friend's garage, picking up odd jobs just to eat. Meanwhile, I sat on the porch of my beach house, sipping wine, watching the waves, and smiling at the thought of how far I had come. Revenge wasn't about destroying him. It was about reclaiming myself. And that I had done perfectly. When the divorce papers were signed, stamped, and finalized, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For years, I had been tethered to Patrick, by love, by obligation, by guilt. But now the chain had been broken. I was free. I remember walking out of the courthouse that day, the sun warming my face, the sound of seagulls crying overhead. My lawyer gave me a congratulatory hug. But the truth was, I didn't need anyone else to validate me. I had finally validated myself. But Patrick, he wasn't ready to let go. He lingered around town like a ghost of my past, popping up at odd times, calling from different numbers, even showing up at the hospital once, begging me to talk to him. He looked thinner, worn down, like life had chewed him up and spat him out. And though a part of me almost pitied him, another part remembered the smug grin on his face the day he told me he was leaving for his village woman. No, Sympathy was a luxury he hadn't earned. One evening, as I was enjoying dinner with a colleague, Patrick stormed into the restaurant. His eyes darted wildly, and his voice trembled as he shouted, "Linda, how could you do this to me? You ruined me." The entire restaurant fell silent. Forks clinked against plates, conversations froze mid-sentence, and every pair of eyes turned toward us. I calmly set my glass down and stood. "Ruined you," I said, my voice low but sharp. "Patrick, you ruined yourself. You chose betrayal. You chose greed. And now you're living with the consequences." He clenched his fists. "I just wanted a life that made sense. Family back home. Respect. And you thought you'd get that by tearing me down?" I snapped. "You thought you could climb on my back and build your empire on my blood and sweat? No, Patrick. Respect isn't taken, it's earned. And you've earned nothing but pity." He stood there, humiliated, while the whispers rippled through the restaurant. Finally, he turned and stormed out, his pride crumbling further with each step. That was the last time he tried to confront me in public. But fate wasn't done teaching him lessons. Word spread quickly about Patrick's downfall. Friends he once boasted to avoided him like the plague. His so-called village woman not only abandoned him but mocked him to anyone who would listen. And the community back in Africa that he once thought would revere him? They now saw him as a disgrace. A man who gambled away his future and lost everything. Meanwhile, I began rebuilding my life. I poured myself into work, volunteering for extra shifts at the hospital, mentoring young nurses, and taking on leadership roles. For the first time in years, I wasn't distracted by chaos at home. Patients and colleagues alike noticed the change. "You look lighter, happier," one of the doctors remarked one day. And he was right. Without Patrick's shadow looming over me, I was glowing again. But I wasn't just healing, I was growing. I took weekend trips to places I'd always wanted to visit. Napa Valley, Charleston, even a spontaneous trip to Paris. I started hosting dinners with friends, filling my house with laughter instead of arguments. And slowly I felt my heart opening again to new possibilities, to new people, maybe even one day to new love. One Sunday, while sipping coffee on my porch, I spotted Patrick walking down the street. He looked like a shell of the man he once was. Clothes hanging loose, beard unkempt, eyes hollow. He didn't notice me, but I noticed him. And in that moment I realized something profound. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate ties you to someone just as tightly as love does. And I was done being tied to Patrick. He was no longer my burden, no longer my story. He was just a lesson. A hard one, but a lesson nonetheless. A week later I received a letter from him. The handwriting was shaky, the paper smudged with what I suspected were tears. "Linda," it read, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say this. I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me. I thought I was chasing happiness, but all I found was emptiness. I hope you find peace. I hope you find someone who deserves you. Please don't let my mistakes define your future." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because it reminded me of just how far I'd come. The reckoning wasn't about punishing Patrick anymore. The real reckoning was about reclaiming myself, my dignity, my voice. And I had done exactly that. As I look back now, I realize something important. Sometimes revenge isn't about breaking the other person. It's about refusing to let them break you. Patrick thought he could strip me of everything, but instead I rose stronger. He lost and I gained not just my freedom but my power. And that's the story I want every woman listening to hear. Don't let anyone convince you that you're nothing without them. Don't sign away your life in the name of love. Protect yourself, your dreams, your hard work. Because at the end of the day, you are the prize. Patrick may have walked away with nothing, but I walked away with everything that mattered. My self-respect, my peace, and a future that no one can take from me. That is my reckoning. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever trusted someone with everything, only for them to betray you when you least expected it? How did you handle it? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, and your words might just help another viewer who's going through the same thing right now. If my story touched you, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next revenge story I share. And please, share this video with a friend or family member who needs to be reminded of their worth. Remember, Revenge isn't always about destroying the other person. It's about reclaiming yourself. This has been Revenge with Mike, and I'll see you in the next story.